Welcome back to my channel, Duck Potatoes World, where we're currently reading Listening to Crickets, a story about Rachel Carson. This will be Chapter 3, The Life of the Sea. It was only a temporary job. Rachel would work at home, writing radio scripts, and she would only be paid $19.25 per week. But Rachel was glad to have the job, any job, when so many walked the streets unemployed. Remember, this is during the Great Depression. When the radio project was over and Mr. Higgins didn't need her to write scripts anymore, well, she'd worry about that later. She proved herself with her first script. Mr. Higgins read what she had written and immediately gave her another assignment. Rachel was delighted to combine her two favorite interests, science and writing. Rachel and her mother fell into an agreeable routine. Mrs. Carson did the cooking and took care of the house. Rachel wrote scripts. Then their little family expanded without warning. Rachel's older sister, Marion, died. Marion's daughters, Virginia and Marjorie, who were both in grammar school, I think that's like elementary school, came to live with their aunt and grandmother. The Carson family needed more room. They moved to a 2-story house in Silver Spring, Maryland, a suburb near Washington, D.C. The rent here was higher than the place in Stemmer's Run, plus Rachel had 2 growing girls to feed and clothe. She needed a permanent job. When Rachel learned of an opening at the Bureau for a junior aquatic biologist, she decided to apply for the position. She was required to take an exam first. An exam is a test. Rachel was the only woman to take the test, and she earned the highest score. The job was hers. Elmer Higgins wanted Rachel in his department. He valued her skills as both a writer and a scientist. Now Rachel was a permanent, full-time employee with a starting salary of $2,000 a year. Twice what she had been earning as a part-time scriptwriter. The Bureau of Fisheries decided to turn the Fishtails radio scripts into a booklet. Rachel's writing style was both readable and graceful. She was the natural choice to rewrite the older radio material, which had been written by other people. Rachel turned the choppy scripts into smooth prose that was a joy to read. When the Fishtails booklet was finished, Mr. Higgins asked Rachel to write an introduction to link the articles together. Since the articles were about sea creatures, Rachel wrote about the environment, and that made their existence possible, the sea. She poured all she felt about the sea into the piece and proudly turned the essay into her chief. Elmer Higgins read her introduction, then told her it was not suitable. Not suitable? Rachel was stunned with disappointment. Did she not reveal the sea in all its glory and power? Wasn't this her best writing effort so far? That was precisely the problem, Mr. Higgins informed her. Her writing was too beautiful. Her descriptions of the sea were too poetic. The introduction overwhelmed the simple Fishtails articles that followed. Mr. Higgins implied that what Rachel had written was too good for a government pamphlet and urged her to send her article to the Atlantic Monthly, a top-quality literary magazine. Rachel put away the Fishtails introduction. It was good, she felt, but not good enough for a prestigious magazine like the Atlantic Monthly. But the experience of writing the Fishtails scripts and the booklet boosted Rachel's confidence. In the evenings and on weekends, whenever she could carve out the time, she wrote articles and sent them to the Baltimore Sun newspaper. "It'll be shad time soon, and Chesapeake Bay fishermen hope for better luck this season," was the first of several articles, published in the newspaper's Sunday magazine section. The Sun articles only brought in $10 or $15 apiece, but Rachel was grateful for the much-needed money. Even with a full-time job and the bonus sales of newspaper articles, money did not stretch far in the Carson house. The Depression lingered, and times were hard for everyone. If only Rachel could make more money writing articles. Remembering her rejected Fishtails introduction, Rachel dug it out and mailed it off to the Atlantic Monthly, as her boss had suggested months ago. The magazine could only say no, she realized. What did she have to lose? 6 weeks later, she received a check for $75. The Atlantic had bought her story. When Undersea appeared in the September 1937 issue, Rachel received an astonishing letter. Quincy Howe, an editor at Simon & Schuster Publishing Company, wrote asking Rachel if she'd ever thought of doing a book. Could she write a book? Rachel listened to her heart as she'd once listened to crickets and decided the life of the sea was worth knowing. She should tell that story. Writing a book while holding down a full-time job was very difficult, she discovered. After her mother and nieces had settled down for the night, Rachel would go upstairs to the big bedroom and write page after page in longhand. Her only companions were her 2 Persian cats, Quito and Buzzy, who often drowsed on her notes. This was before people had computers in all their homes and could just type things up. Under the Sea Wind, her book, was published in November of 1941. Rachel was 34 years old. She proudly gave the first copy to her mother, who had typed Rachel's handwritten manuscript. The book was dedicated to her. The reviews were very good. No one had ever written a book about the sea from the point of view of the creatures who inhabited it. The reader learns about migration from a pair of shorebirds and about the struggle for survival in the ocean from a baby mackerel. Then the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, and the world turned its attention to more important news. The United States was at war. Rachel's book was forgotten. In 1940, the Bureau of Fisheries had become part of the newly formed Fish and Wildlife Service. Rachel's wartime assignment for the Fish and Wildlife Service was writing bulletins urging people to serve fish at meals. Meat was rationed on the home front in order to keep the fighting troops well supplied. Rationed means that families could only buy so much meat, and they had little coupons they had to use to buy their meat. And when they ran out of coupons, they couldn't buy any more meat. They were limited. People relied too heavily on familiar types of fish like cod. Rachel's job was to introduce other types of fish and shellfish into American diets. Even though she advised millions of people to serve clams at the supper table, Rachel herself didn't like seafood. At the end of the war, Rachel became chief editor for the Information Division of the Fish and Wildlife Service. She had a staff of 6 employees and an office with a large framed photograph of a Maryland blue crab as the only decoration. Her employees found her to be quiet and efficient. Her mind was keen. She had a remarkable memory. She could quote paragraphs she dictated days before. Her work reflected her attention to detail. Rachel always double-checked her facts. Yet, Rachel had a humorous side. She dreamed up a prank that was the talk of the department for years. A fellow writer in the Chicago office wrote and published a sloppy bulletin about the cooking of wild game. Dismayed at the quality of the work, Rachel decided to play a trick on the woman. Pretending to be a feature writer for an important national publication, Rachel composed a telegram. The telegram informed the Chicago woman the magazine would do a big story on her if she cooked field mice in mushroom sauce. Rachel was ready to send the message until she found out it was against the law to send telegrams under a false name. Well, good thing she didn't break the law, huh? Although work kept her busy, Rachel was not satisfied. She had written one book about the sea. Now she wanted to write another. This book would be different. Instead of describing the creatures who lived in or near the sea, she would describe the sea itself. This would be a book that she often wished she could find in the library. It would be her most ambitious project yet. Her second book proved to be much more difficult to write than her first book. Rachel was a slow, careful writer, and she had little time to write between her job and her duties at home. She worked best at night and often went directly from her desk at home to her desk at the office. This schedule soon wore her down, but after 6 months with little sleep, Rachel had enough of a manuscript to show a publisher. She was successful. Oxford University Press sent Rachel a contract and gave her a deadline for the rest of the book. Rachel knew she would not meet the deadline unless she was able to leave her job for a while. Yet she could not because her family needed the money. Fortunately, help arrived. In August of 1949, she was awarded a fellowship grant. The money from the grant allowed her to take an extended leave of absence from her government job. Yet the time off proved to be very stressful. The Carson family moved to another house in Silver Spring, and for a while, one of Rachel's nieces was ill. To make matters worse, when Rachel went back to her government job, she had to catch up on the work she had missed. In spite of everything, Rachel continued to work on her book through the fall of 1949 and the winter and spring of 1950, with her cat, Tippy, batting the typewriter keys. With her cat, Tippy, batting the typewriter keys. That would be annoying if your cat was sitting on your typewriter. At last, the book was finished, and it was scheduled to be published as The Sea Around Us in July of 1951. Rachel was relieved the difficult task was over. She had written a book that made the reader experience the vastness and power of the sea. In her book, the sea was not just a rolling body of water, but an environment that worked with, and sometimes against, a more well-known environment, the land. Rachel knew she had written a good book, but she had no clue what would happen next. The Sea Around Us became an instant bestseller. At the age of 44, Rachel was famous. Her life would never be the same. As a best-selling author, she toured the country, autographing books and giving talks. Awards and honors poured in. She won the John Burroughs Medal for Excellence in Nature Writing. She was the first woman to be given the Henry G. Bryant Medal of the Philadelphia Geographical Society. The Sea Around Us was the 1951 National Book Award winner for nonfiction. But sudden fame had its downside, too. Rachel had always been a quiet, private person, and now she was pestered by people wherever she went. She was even badgered by a fan in the beauty parlor while her hair was in pin curls. Success was exhausting. Rachel lost 20 pounds from all the attention. She wanted to retreat by the sea and write. She had enough money for once, so she resigned from her government job. The future was calling her. It was time to listen. Thanks for joining us.